Hello, everyone. This is the Hey Chaplain podcast, and I'm not Chaplain Altic. Obviously. I'm Joe Grasela. I'm back. Today, we're going to do a little talking about the podcast in 2022, and I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Jared.
I'm glad you're here, Joe. Yeah, we're wanting to review the last year and kind of just do a rundown of what we accomplished and then maybe take a look into what 2023 has for us.
Yeah, busy year for I mean, how many? 40 episodes or more?
Yeah, counting bonus episodes and all of that, it was probably around 40 episodes.
That's a lot of work. I mean, that's I know
or
you're
something
already
that's only supposed to be twice a month.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you've got a busy schedule, right? I mean, you've got your church, and then you've got all of your work that you do with the police department.
Yeah.
And then you're adding this podcast to it. That's a busy schedule for you.
I have no other life, and so yes.
I hope you're not neglecting your family and everybody. I mean, I'm sure they want to see you too.
No, church and family come first.
Good,
but yeah, I don't golf, and so yeah, there's no other activities but this stuff.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm glad that I get to talk to you instead of play golf because I'm awful. So I think I'm better at talking than swinging the 9-iron. So yeah, I'm terrible. You know, I guess you could say I'm a little bit partial since I've been on the show a couple times, but I'm a big fan, and I really do enjoy listening to your show. Mm-hmm. And I think this year you've had a lot of really good episodes that I've really enjoyed, or maybe were hard to listen to, but they were really good and really captivating and really riveting. Like it was so interesting to me that I didn't want to turn it off. So what do you think? I mean, how do you think the year went overall?
We had a good mix of heavy-hitting episodes and some lighter fare also. I've gotten a lot of good compliments this year on the variety of topics that we've had.
Yeah.
And I try to do that because every now and again I'll get topics that look like they're almost the same topic, and I try not to ever run those back to back. Mm-hmm. And since I work a couple months out, I usually can spread them out. So if there are two topics that are adjacent, they don't necessarily show up in the same month together.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. How much time do you normally put in on a specific episode? Like how many hours or? It's
hard to say because I've got several irons in the fire. I'm always recruiting potential guests, sometimes 6 months or a year out. Wow. And so I'm working for months to, hey, I want to talk to an author, so I'm going to read their book first, and I let them know that I'm reading their book, and then I'll come back to them a couple months later, and we'll set up an interview, then we'll do an interview. All of that, I don't really add up that time, but it's always ongoing. Mm-hmm. The interview itself doesn't take very long, but then editing the interview can take 2 or 3 times the amount of time it took. A 30-minute recording is probably an hour and a half worth of editing.
Wow.
And then, I spread that over the course of a month or two, and then it gets published.
Yeah. And
the publishing stuff isn't too hard. But I could see why people hire an assistant to do the recruiting part of it.
Okay.
Trying to find and schedule those guests. I mean, that's a little bit of work. And people they have conflicts in their schedule.
Right.
And so I got people that I have on the hook, and they get away because they just had a conflict or something else came up.
I bet you too, the other part of it is just that, not only do they have to have availability in their schedule, but you have to have availability in yours, and those both have to match.
Yeah.
It's a matter of ships passing in the night where you really have a good potential interview. They really want to be on the show, but just your availability just doesn't seem to match.
I favor interviews that I can do in person. Okay. Right now, you and I are sitting across a desk from one another, looking at each other. I'm highly, I prefer those greatly.
I know for myself, with COVID and everything that came and we had to deal with, and everything changed, and we all went to Zoom meetings or talking on the phone more or video conferencing, and there was just a certain amount of not knowing when to jump in, like the natural pauses in conversations and knowing when it was your turn to speak, and that a lot of that was lost because you didn't have that personal connection. So I had so many awkward interviews or meetings where no one knows when to talk, and everyone's trying to be respectful, but sometimes you just had these long pauses or everyone talking over each other. It would be frustrating.
It forces me to be a much better listener because I can't see them necessarily if I'm talking to them over the phone, and that's a little extra challenge, but that's okay. It's something I can clean up in editing. Yeah. If we start to talk over one another, I can clean that up.
And honestly, I think some of my favorite episodes from this year of your show were episodes that I think you were talking to people on the phone, and I know as a listener, I'm thankful you were able to get that interview because I thought they were so good.
Yeah,
think that, okay, you weren't able to meet with somebody in person to think that you wouldn't have that interview. It would be, I think, a loss to the show.
Something I really like is people, how they answer the phone. There are some people who answer the phone so warm and enthusiastically that I often will put that in, sometimes as a cold open to the episode, because I so liked how they answered the phone. And it's separate from the rest of the interview, but man, they were just so wonderful the first couple seconds on the line. I just said, well, I definitely want to include that.
Right.
Yeah. So did you have any favorite episodes this
I had
year?
a bunch. I mean, yes, I had a bunch. I wouldn't even narrow it down to 3, but yeah, I had a ton. I mean, some of the big ones that I thought of were some of your interviews. They were really able to give their experiences firsthand. Talking about the officer that had experienced things that I can't even imagine with the LA riots and then the loss of a partner. Yeah. His kind of story about his career and what he was going through and things that he was dealing with.
Yeah, that was Ward Jenkins.
Ward Jenkins, yeah. That was a powerful, I was completely captivated during that entire interview. When he talked about going into work with the riots going on and how awful everything was and how, few officers and going out and basically helping the fire department responding because they had a firefighter that had been shot.
The firefighters. Yeah.
They had a firefighter shot earlier in the day or the day before.
Got
and
shot in the face.
They were protecting them and going out, running a call, assisting the fire department, and then encountering the situation where, he's hearing a person scream for help inside a business that is being taken over by looters and rioters and making the decision, that absolutely impossible decision of what do I do here? Yeah. And you could tell that weight on him. To this day.
Years later.
Just him recounting that and telling that, you could really tell how much that stuck with him. And I was like, whoa, I can't. So.
Yeah, and that's what I think a lot of cops identified with that because they've been in those situations of one sort or another where there was no good choice. Mm-hmm. It's I'm going to pick something that has a lot of negative connected to it no matter which way I go. It's kind of a devil's fork.
Right.
And so do I leave this responsibility, put these firefighters in jeopardy to make an attempt at a rescue, or do I let that person, their cries for help, go unanswered? There's no good answer there. And so 30 years on, that still haunts him. And I think a lot of cops identified with that.
Yeah.
Your story that you told in an episode you were in, because you've been in, I think this is your 6th episode.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
And one of the stories you told was about encountering someone at their back door. You were a distance away, had your gun drawn. They were threatening you. They were daring you to shoot them. Mm-hmm. And then they go back in the house.
Right.
Do you follow? Do you not follow?
Right.
You don't know what's going to happen when they go inside that house or what they could do to you. There's no good answer.
There isn't.
There.
Yeah, no.
And so, like I said, I think a lot of cops find themselves in that spot where there's just not a good answer. And so when they hear someone else talk about it, they realize, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who's gone through this and had the response afterward and all that kind of thing. They can identify with it.
No, and it's funny that you mentioned that episode that I was on because I think my experience and what I went through maybe is one little piece of maybe what he felt. Obviously that stakes in my mind from that experience, but I think the stakes were even higher for him.
For Ward Jenkins?
The totality of the riots and what was going on in Los Angeles at the time. So I think maybe I've got a little piece of what maybe he felt. But funny, like I said, that you mentioned that episode, I recently had been kind of coordinated some training with our department, and we were going through, it was about a week's worth of training, and we had people from our agency, other agencies, even people that were mental health professionals and stuff from all sorts of agencies in our area. So it's kind of this cool melting pot, if you will, of different experiences and stuff. Mm-hmm. So we're going through our training, and I think we were breaking for lunch, and I had actually an officer from our police department that came up and said that he had listened to that episode and we ended up having this great conversation, and he talked about a similar experience that he had with basically a pursuit that basically his body had physiological responses from it with adrenaline and all these things going through his body. And it was kind of cool that we got to kind of say, he's cool, listening to that episode and hearing what you went through. I went through a very similar experience, and it was kind of cool getting to hear that other people have been through that. And I know for me, it meant a lot that he said that, and that I was like, wow, I'm glad I did this because I talked about, this experience that I had because maybe it will bring benefit to other people. So that was really cool. That was something that really stuck with me this year.
Yeah, you actually got to see that come around and see that it helped somebody.
I think it also speaks kind of to this show and the good that you're doing. And I know there's probably, people maybe get to comment on the episodes or, leave feedback or some of that, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that you may never hear from that have gotten a lot of benefit from the show. So I think that's got to be cool to know that.
Yeah. Well, locally, it would mystify me why a new recruit at our department wouldn't go through my catalog of past shows and find all of these sergeants and captains that have been interviewed.
Yeah.
And go listen to all those just so you know the people you're working for a little
Cliff's
bit better.
Notes version of
who am I working
it
seems
for?
like that would be great, opposition research or something.
Right. No, yeah, that's a good idea. But I'm trying to think some of the other, like I said, there's so many episodes this year that I've really enjoyed. Another couple episodes that really stuck with me was the story of the officer that really had the downfall and then the redemption. And, talked about his life experiences, things he'd done in law enforcement, kind of his personal troubles, and then also his physical problems. I think
Norm
he was dealing
Welsh
with Norm.
is his name.
Norm's Norm's episode with kind of the spiral down, and then eventually, he talked about, basically getting to the point where he was selling narcotics and getting caught, and complete opposite. I mean, that was the exact opposite of what he was doing. I mean, he's working in essentially narcotic units.
Yes.
And, leading narcotics units, and then to have that happen to him, and then
completely unraveled, personally, professionally, completely undone. Yeah.
And then, I think he even talked about, suicidal ideation and thoughts about, how he was going to carry it out, and then his arrest and eventual conviction, and then spending, 8 or 9 years in prison.
Yeah.
And his sort of redemption and catharsis and all these things that he went through in prison, and then getting to hear him now where he's at such a better place in his life, and
is able one of the few examples of someone who's truly been reformed through their prison experience. Had actual religious conversion that was legitimate, and truly changed who he was and how he looked at life, and he's better for it now. And boy, never think you'd say that about prison,
right?
Especially for a cop going to prison.
And then his where he's at in his life and his perspective and how he's able to look. It's such a rational way about what he went through, and kind of how he's talking about a bunch of police officers that he worked with, and how when he went through all that, a lot of them completely disassociated from him and didn't talk to him, didn't support him in any way. And I can see that because, partially it's just how we operate. We don't want to, we think of it's us versus them in terms of us versus people committing crime.
Yeah.
And then how he was but everybody that's committing crime, something happened in their life or something, led them down that road, and the humanity of it. And I was like, whoa, that really stuck with me. And then how his experiences of interacting with people in prison and people caring about him and providing him support, and then, working to where he is now. It was a very powerful episode, I thought.
Yeah, I had a couple along those lines that I liked also. I liked the interview with the forensic nurses.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
Morgan and Sarah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were funny, and boy, they have a tough job. And so that was opening up a new corner of the law enforcement world that I just wasn't very knowledgeable about.
And is so vital. We have to have that,
Yeah. So that was I really enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed meeting them and doing that interview. And then also the interview with Doug Monda about surviving his suicide, where he literally put a Glock to his head and pulled the trigger and had a misfire.
Yeah.
And now is an advocate for suicide awareness and that kind
even
of thing.
If I remember right, his experiences too leading up to that, the moment where he was in a incident where he basically got run over.
Yeah, got hit by a truck.
Basically was a kid driving it, and he was it's just...
Yeah, could have shot the driver, but saw that it was a child and didn't. And the truck hit him and just destroyed him.
Right.
Yeah, broke all these bones and everything else.
That was hard to listen to. I'll admit that was a tough episode to listen to what he had been through, but same thing, to hear where he's at now in his life and how he can process that and even talk about it is a lot. I I can't imagine going through all that. And, like you said, putting a gun to your head, pulling the trigger, and it goes click.
Yeah, of the most reliable type of gun ever made.
Yes.
And it didn't go off. Right. Yeah. And so, that's something. And he was, and in that particular incident, his friends were right there and wrestling the gun away from him and everything. And so he didn't get a chance to try it again. But thank goodness, because now his life is completely different. He's in a different place and loves life now.
Right.
But mercy sakes, that was a very close call.
Right. I know another one for me, just in terms of episodes that really stick out in my mind, is I loved the episode where he interviewed the detective from Scotland Yard, the London Metropolitan Police officer, his experiences, and talked about working such a terrible terrorist incident with the bombing, and then his experience working in murders and in homicide investigations, and
how they do it very differently at Scotland Yard than how American police departments function.
Very much so. Yeah. I love London. I've been there. I got to when I was in college, I got to go to school and spend about a month in London. And I fell in love with the city. I would go back tomorrow in a heartbeat, if it wasn't so expensive. So just listening to that episode, I just loved it. Just getting to hear their perspective and
that's Steve Keogh, and I still stay in touch with him. Yeah, nice. He's a neat guy.
Yeah, so. that was cool. And then his, that he's now kind of like we've talked about this in other situations, but just the thought process of police. You can't be a police officer forever, and I think this year you were able to incorporate that kind of thought process into quite a few of your episodes and saying, hey, look, the reality is as much as you want to do this forever, you can't.
There's going to be another chapter of your life after law enforcement.
And you have to start thinking about what you want to do, right? So you had, episodes where you talked with multiple officers that have transitioned out of law enforcement through retirement or medical retirement or whatever, or even criminal behavior and losing their job, right? Yeah. And then what do you do later on in life? So I thought that was at least
some of them became authors, some of them became chaplains, some of them do completely different stuff.
Right.
But
But
yeah,
so that
wasn't on purpose. But it did become a theme.
It was a theme. Yeah.
Yeah. From one episode
transitions.
to the next.
The Hey Chaplain podcast, season 2 transitions. So no, I thought that was really good. What are some of your other episodes that you really enjoyed or?
There's episodes that I love all of them, and especially getting to know the people and even befriending them as I interview them and interact with them before and after the interview. There's episodes that I know this is good content from good people, but the topic may not thrill. It may not be clickbait.
Okay.
And I don't really want to do clickbait.
Yeah.
But there's times where I know that this is a topic that a young officer needs to hear.
Yeah.
And so like I talked to Nick Doherty about, money moves for law enforcement. He does financial cop. That is his area of expertise is how do cops make better financial decisions,
which is so crucial to
so many cops, they finally get in the first paycheck. First thing they do is go buy this hugely expensive truck,
right?
And it's got all the bells and whistles
with the incredibly high interest rate.
Oh no, yes. And so getting some just basic financial advice I felt was crucial, and it's a topic I want to come back to, whether it gets the maximum number of downloads or not. I just think it's important,
right?
And so there were topics like that were meaningful to me, including what do you do after you leave law enforcement. Talked to Mike the cop, Mike Edwards, and he talked about moving into real estate. That's kind of his niche, is moving cops and veterans into the next chapter of their lives and having them sell real estate, because a lot of the people skills transfer really well from law enforcement over to that kind of business. And again, it's one of those things where even if a cop doesn't want to think about it, you really should have some kind of plan B, because some injury or some other unforeseen event may prevent you from having a super long career. And frankly, in law enforcement, there's no such thing as a super long career.
Right,
I mean, 25, 30 years is about the most anybody does, with rare exceptions.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
well. Then, like I was thinking
important.
too, the another episode I really liked was the one about the Kansas City Mafia and organized crime.
Yes.
With Gary Jenkins, and he went from being a Kansas City, Missouri police officer for years, but then he talked about going to law school and practicing and doing the legal thing.
Yeah.
And that was always interesting. And then obviously now he's doing something else where he's got
a very successful podcast.
Yeah. So I thought that was cool. You mentioned writers, but lawyers. You've got people that going into becoming becoming a chaplain or going into something to do with religion or whatever. So there's all these different things that you've talked to with people that they've gone on to do. A couple of people have said, what was it? I just didn't want to work in government anymore. I think that was kind of, or I don't want to have a boss anymore. I want to be my own boss.
I heard that multiple times this
year. Yeah. I noticed that too. So that was cool.
Yeah. And also one more that I think I really would want to underline and direct people back to was the episode with Susie Sawyer. She's the lady that started Concerns of Police Survivors all those years ago. Now it's one of the largest, nonprofits that serve the law enforcement community
in such an important way too.
Oh yes, yes, and her story is a fascinating story, but she is a delight to talk to also, and so it's a good story with a really witty, charming person.
Yeah.
And it's one of my very favorite interviews I've ever done. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, I've heard Hey Chaplain talk about concerns of police survivors before, so I'll just skip this one. And it's one of the very best. It's one of my absolute favorites.
Good. One thing else I kind of noticed this year that I enjoyed and thought was important was I think he showed a lot of love by bringing forward people in the law enforcement community that aren't maybe sworn officers and talking about their stories. So people working in victim services, people working in communications or dispatch, the people that are so crucial to keeping the big blue bus moving forward and investigating crime and supporting people and
the judge and
Judge Sarah. That was a good one. Yeah.
He was one I wanted at the very it was on my list from day one. I wanted to talk to a judge about what they see from the bench in regard to police officers in court.
Yeah.
And it took a long time to find the right judge and one that was willing to talk.
He did it a long time too. He was in Wyandotte County for my whole career until he retired, and then he
and it was so good. He was a pleasure to talk to.
I mean, it's funny but not funny. But when he was telling the story about the bailiff or the detention deputy bringing the all the defendants in, and they're all in their orange jumpsuits and everything, and he's looking at the list and he's like, "Hey, isn't there? I've got 13 people. I only count 12. Where's the 13th?" And then the guy was like, "Uh-oh," and the guy had escaped and ran off in shackles. I was like, that is awesome. You cannot make that up. That's great. But I thought some of those episodes were really cool. I thought I learned a lot from them. And, I've been doing this. I've been in law enforcement for a few years now. And
how long have you been?
I'm in my 15th year.
15 years.
Yeah. So I've been doing a little bit. There's obviously a lot of people I work with that have been doing it a lot longer, but, learning about some of the, things that have to happen behind the scenes. If we don't have dispatchers, we're not coming to your emergency call.
Yeah.
It's just, it's not happening.
Critical
If
job.
we don't have victim services, we are not providing.
It's a difference maker to the community.
Yes.
To have victim services.
Yes. And another thing that, I think that is sort of something we don't like to talk about, but the reality is we're public service. Like we are a customer support, customer service based,
trade.
Trade. That's a great way of putting it. So, we have to make sure that we are supporting our customers, which unfortunately very often are victims of crime and, people that perpetuate crime, whether we like it or not.
Right.
And for things like, victim services to be that sort of liaison between the police department and,
law enforcement is not sustainable if absolutely everybody hates you.
Correct.
That's not a direction you want to go.
No, not at all. And we have our authority and everything else, but that is granted to us by the people.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not like we just naturally have that. So
it is always better to have a good relationship
and then
with the community.
You have to have the ability for people to think they can talk to the police. And if they're not willing to be a witness and they're not willing to tell you what they saw and they're not willing to provide you information, you're going to have a lot of those violent crimes and property crimes that are going to go unsolved because we have to have participation from our community to move forward. So it's just so vital. So I know the shows obviously can be listened. People can listen to it all over the world, right? I mean, anywhere that you can get a podcast, you can download it. So that you've got all the different, whether it's Apple or Stitcher. I mean, I'm sure
Spotify is a big one. Yeah.
So there's a bunch of them. What I know you get those analytics and that data. Where are people listening to the show at now? Has anything changed or different?
I've got the list right in front of me. The top 10 countries.
Okay.
Starting in number 1, obviously United States.
Go USA.
About 89% of my listeners come from the United States.
Okay. Makes sense.
Followed by Canada, Australia, South Africa, the UK, Mexico, Germany, New Zealand, Belgium, and the Netherlands.
So a lot of those make sense because it's primarily English-speaking countries.
A lot of Commonwealth nations.
Yes. Yeah. Former colonial from the United Kingdom.
India is in the top 15.
Okay. Yeah.
But
once again, there's quite a few of those countries are predominantly English-speaking, but there's a few in there you threw in that aren't.
No, and I don't know. See, in Germany, there's a lot of Americans in Germany. And there's always a chance that a few of these countries, I'm getting some hits off of people with a VPN spoofing their location.
Got it.
And so there are occasionally I'll see a hit where there's certain places around the world that are known for just they have a
VPN type thing,
data hub thing, right? And VPNs pick that specific place, and I kind of know that those are actually probably cops very close by that are spoofing their location.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But most people don't do that. And so most of this data is pretty reliable. And same thing with the top 10 cities, not counting the Kansas City metro, because obviously I have a lot of people locally who listen to the show. But outside of Kansas City, my top 10 cities are Denver, Colorado, Riverside, California, Houston, Texas, Tucson, Arizona, St. Louis, Missouri, Monroe, Louisiana, Miami, Florida, Sydney, Australia, Cleveland, Ohio, and
Cleveland.
Seattle, Washington.
Cool.
Yep. And so those are the top 10. And those fluctuate a little bit because some of those are neck and neck with the ones right behind them. But yeah, we get and a lot of those, not every one of those cities, but most of those cities I've had contact with people who have reached out on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and they've said,
hey. So speaking of that, what kind of feedback are you getting from listeners? I mean, is there a lot of, do you get emails or people commenting or leaving reviews of the episodes? Is there anything that sticks out in your mind?
Well, it's affirmation that this is going out into the internet ether and it's not returning void. I mean, there's actually people hearing it and responding.
Yeah.
And so I've had some nice notes. I've had a little bit of feedback. I have almost zero negative feedback.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever gotten anything yet. But a 5-star review,
which is great.
Which kind of means that there's not enough people reviewing it, because eventually there's somebody that's out there just in a bad mood. Yeah. You really should have at least one-star review out there somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think though that especially when I'm looking at things like either really care and like a podcast or I don't. And if I do, I'm gonna give them a 5-star review because I really enjoy the content they're putting out. It's not like this is only a 3.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think if people enjoy the show and they like what you're putting out, they're gonna put that out as a 5-star review or whatever, a positive review,
right?
Because it makes sense.
And I've had a lot of good feedback like that. Just people saying they appreciate it. A lot of cops that are retired saying, "Hey, this reminds me of something I went through."
Oh, wow, okay.
So I get a lot of nice notes from retirees like that. But I think the ones that mean the most to me are the face-to-face ones where we've had officers that say, "Hey, I listened and that meant a lot to me, and I appreciate that you put that out there." And I think those probably just touch me on a personal level even more so than the ones that get over the internet.
For sure. And, kind of once going back to another episode, I loved your episode where it was the theme was like being a patrol chaplain. And you had that conversation and you guys were able to discuss about what you're going for, like what you're trying to do and what your thought process is on being a chaplain, and you're
being proactive and that kind of thing.
But also just being present, which was I think a big, topic of your discussion was just be there so that people are used to seeing you around and that you're not just this stranger, and then having those connections with people where they feel that they can come up and talk to you. They may not feel comfortable talking to you, like you said, for a few years. Yeah. But once you've been around enough, you've started to become a face of the agency, and you're there. And, having those face-to-face conversations is, a big thing.
And that is kind of the not so hidden agenda of this podcast, is that I know that a lot of officers are not comfortable talking to a chaplain or psychologist or even peer support sometimes. But they might listen to a podcast. And so I can get in a lot more ears
Right.
by putting out this podcast than I could if I just, went and said, "Hey, would you like to talk about your feelings?"
Yeah. And I know
They're probably going to say no.
a big, a part of what your intended audience, right, would be, you always talk about, share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
People like me, people like my spouse, or like my dad. My dad's a big fan of the show.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, he loves it. But another, I'm guessing, potential audience that you're looking for is also other chaplains or other people,
other helpers.
Yeah, that are, trying to help and be there for agencies and officers and stuff. So have you had any feedback from other people that have either are currently a chaplain or have the interest in potentially becoming that?
I have a dear friend, his name's Jeff Wolf, but he is a chaplain and has done a lot to mentor me as far as what a chaplain is and what a chaplain does and how not to reinvent the wheel, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And put a lot of resources in front of me, which I greatly appreciate. But he's an avid listener as well, and he gets really excited about some of the topics that introduce cultural competency to other helpers. Okay. That these are topics that a chaplain who's not been in law enforcement may not be aware of, that they need to be brought up to speed.
Okay.
And these help in that sense. And so it's helping the cop talk about an area he needs to talk about, but it's also helping the helper, let's say a chaplain. It helps the chaplain get up to speed on an area that they maybe never considered that this was an issue in law enforcement, but having listened to the podcast, now they do.
Well, you had an episode this year where you interviewed a chaplain that went on his first ride along with an agency, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was cool,
Yeah.
getting his perspective on things.
I actually have kind of a chaplain starter pack where I've said, okay, if you're becoming a chaplain, please listen to these 3 or 4 episodes, and that'll get you up to speed on what some of us are trying to do. And at least you'll have some awareness, before you dive into the agency that you're at.
I, listening to that episode, honestly, I mentioned some of my favorite episodes, but some of the ones that I was kind of not shocked by, but most, I went into wanting to listen to them, but then as I listened to them, I thought they were just so interesting. And that was one.
Yeah.
The patrol chaplain, that episode was excellent. Like we said, you talking about your guys' thought process on what you want to do, how you want to do that. And thinking about that, I was thinking about you and what you've done with our agency, right? And kind of your thought process and how you're trying to do things and interact with our officers that we, want to be there for. And I thought that was awesome. I really enjoyed that episode. I didn't even think I would. I really liked it.
I've spent years teaching in the church. And one of the little tactics that you can use to get people to listen is to let them overhear. And so a lot of churches will bring up the little kids to the front of the church we'll do a little Bible lesson.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks it's so cute and it's 5 minutes long and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That is actually this super genius move, because while the pastor's talking to the little kids, all of the parents are listening. And they may listen to that better than they listen to the sermon.
Wow.
Right? And so if you listen to 2 chaplains talk about doing a ride-along, that's 2 outsiders stepping into your world, and it's not directed at you, but you might listen to it better because you're overhearing someone else's experience.
Well, you got me.
And
you hooked me.
So it's on purpose, right?
Yeah, you got me. Guilty.
Yeah. So what do you want to see in the future? I mean, not everything's set in stone. I'm working a couple months out, but what kind of things do you want to see me cover in the future?
I'm always a big fan of diversity. So, maybe police officers working in other parts of the world, other experiences that they've had. You've had some of those interviews where you've talked to people working in Army CID or some of those other agencies and stuff. I always find that interesting to hear. One, for me, just to learn what they do or have a better understanding of what they do.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking of if I was, if it's me when I'm 18, and what do I want to do for a career? Learning about all these other options and things that would have never come to mind, that I was that would have probably been a pretty good fit for me. So, some of those things, I think if people listen to the show and they have a desire to either, get into, becoming a police officer or, some other type of law enforcement adjacent profession, getting to hear about those, I think, are really interesting. And then some of those episodes this year where you had those really these firsthand accounts of just this riveting things. Yeah. Anytime you can get more of that, I'm in.
Well, that's always on the agenda, is to get firsthand accounts. Almost any officer has had, if they're able to tell the story, which sometimes they're not at a place where they really want to. But if you have an officer who's willing to talk, the best stories come out. And I often will put that on social media. I'll be on Twitter or on Facebook, and I'll say cops tell great stories because they really do. And so there's lots of those lined up, coming up here in the next several months.
I'll be looking forward to that.
I have these irons in the fire for Border Patrol, Internal Affairs, SWAT, rural agencies, because a lot of times there's just so much focus, especially on television, so much focus on big urban agencies. But talking about, these rural agencies where this guy, he's out on patrol and he's really miles from the next closest police officer.
I have. Yeah. There are guys in our department that have lateraled over from other agencies, and hearing their stories about when they were working for some of these smaller agencies and how, getting pinned down by rifle fire or, getting attacked and not having a backup, or
your backup's 15 minutes away.
Your backup's
or more.
A highway patrolman that you're going to have to wake up, and he's going to be here in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
That's scary.
That's
and I
scary.
can't imagine working in that environment. So those guys and gals are tough.
Well, there's some of that coming up. I do want to talk to women in law enforcement, being a mom, being a wife, having that kind of thing. So that's a different dynamic. And it's only about a fifth of law enforcement that's female.
Yeah.
And so they kind of have an uphill road to climb a little bit. And I want to talk about that a little bit. I want to talk about what it's like for immigrants coming into our country and becoming a police officer in a country they weren't born in.
Okay.
I want to talk to a doctor who specializes in law enforcement health.
Okay.
And just look at, why is it that cops die 10 years younger than everybody else? Yeah. And so that's on the schedule, I hope. Not all these, I can't guarantee. Right. They're not going to all come out in January, but in 2023, I'm confident I'll get them sooner or later. Cool. Looking at different countries, I've got a second plan of attack for South Africa. I'm still trying to get, it's been working for over a year to get an interview with a police officer from South Africa. I'm still working on that. And Mexico, Australia, a few places like that. I've got some leads. Nice. I'm hoping those will turn into interviews and more law enforcement history. I love law enforcement history. Oh, yeah, me too. And so historic shootouts and criminals and that kind of thing.
Or just how business was done back in the day.
It's fascinating. Yeah. It's fascinating. And so I'm definitely, there's going to be some history sprinkled in among all these other interviews as well.
I'm a huge history buff and I love it. And thinking about those officers working and, generations ago, and it's not that long ago when you think about it. Officers would have to go to a call box, and they didn't have a radio on their hip. Yeah. Things that we take for granted nowadays are just
and because officers tend to die younger, the resources. You see like an interview with 100-year-old World War II vet, and there's only just a handful of those left.
I know. Yeah.
Well, it's much shorter for law enforcement. Because you need, to get somebody who was in law enforcement 30, 40 years ago, that's some pretty thin ranks. Right. And you've really got to pounce on that. So I'm always looking for retirees that can tell me about what it was like to be a cop in the 1960s or 70s or 80s.
Yeah. You hear the stories or read the books of guys that were cops in the 60s and 70s, and they went through some really tough stuff then too.
Oh, yes. If you think that law enforcement is going down the drain or something like that, if you feel real negative about it, remember that this is not a drain. This is a pendulum. And so whatever is trending one direction, it will reverse and trend the other direction. And that will come with pros and cons.
Yeah. What's the famous line? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so yes, there will be lean times and there'll be good times too. And problem is we often don't recognize the good times until they're already over. So that's unfortunate.
I'm sure people listen to the show, or you get referred, you talk to somebody and then they refer you to someone else to talk to, right? Or, I'm sure that happens. What are some other ways that, if maybe somebody's a fan of the show and maybe they do have a really good story to tell, what's a way that they could maybe reach out to you and say, hey, I'd love to be on the show? Like, how would they go about that?
Yeah, the best way is still Facebook. Get on the Facebook group for Hey Chaplain and just message me. Okay. Make a comment. I read all those comments. I try to respond every time someone comments. And also Twitter. Now, Twitter has changed a lot in the last few months. We're here recording this at the end of 2022. And I think I'm not going to be shadow banned quite as much. In law enforcement stuff, if you have something positive to say about cops, there was a few years where you'd put that on social media and algorithms just did not spread it around.
Wow.
You'd put it out there and it just kind of disappeared. And so I think Twitter is a little bit better than it was a few months ago. And so I've reestablished myself on Twitter. You can contact me there also.
Okay.
And yes, if there's an opportunity, I would love to talk to you, understanding that I've got so many irons in the fire. It's going to be months before I could likely get that in. I mean, there's exceptions, but for the most part, I'm working several months out.
Yeah.
And I just can't take everybody. Some people are not a good fit for this show, and I've got to make an editorial decision to be like, okay, I think you've got a great story. I just think that's a great story for a different podcast.
Oh yeah, and that'd be tough too, especially if it's interesting, but you're like, yeah, this isn't really,
or I just did an episode on that exact topic.
Yeah.
I've just covered that. This would be it'd be the Department of Redundancy department. And so you can't have the same episode over and over and over again.
Good point.
The point of my show is that it's got a lot of variety. And so sometimes I've had to say no, or I've had to say, can you please wait? And I had one at the end of 2022 that they waited for 6 months for me to do an interview, and they wanted it early in 2022, and instead they were going to be the last episode of the year, and so they were very patient with me, and I appreciate that.
No, that's great. I mean, I know that you're thinking big picture too, right? And you have to, and you're thinking down the road, short term goals, long term goals. What do I want the show to do? What do I want to cover? And then you're balancing that with timelines and staying on, basically staying on track and doing all these other things. It's got to be a lot to think about. Yeah.
There's a little bit of concern that this show could be the victim of its own success, because as it grows, hosting it on the internet becomes more expensive. And I've made a pretty public commitment that I'm not running commercials on this show. I'm not going to advertise. And so I'm doing this as a hobby. I'm spending my money to do it.
Yeah.
And so there's going to come a point where I'm probably going to have to ask people, probably away from the show on the side, probably through social media. I'll just say, hey, can you help me out a little bit with these hosting fees or subscriptions or whatever I have to do? Certainly, if I ever got to the point where I needed to hire someone to do my editing or whatever, I'm gonna need some people to partner with me to keep the show going. Because if the show stayed small, I could probably do it indefinitely. But the show's growing. And it's getting better, and it's being heard all over the world.
Which is a good thing.
Like 60 different countries. And so, it's good, but I may need some help in the future. But I probably won't be talking about it on air. It'd be a thing that you'd see in the Facebook group or on Twitter. Where I just say, hey, I could use a little bit of help with paying this or paying that. Okay. And so,
like you said, it's a good thing that the show is getting more listenership, and people are getting to hear it and get this awesome content that you're putting out to the world, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't come for free either.
No. And I just don't see this show ever becoming a show that runs commercials for mattresses, and I just don't think that'll ever happen. But there are other ways to skin that cat, and I can get support on the side, and people can kind of come in and partner with me, and cool. I'm pretty confident that the little bit of help that I need, it'll be covered. I'm not too worried about it. I think this show has a lot of legs still.
On behalf of myself, and I'm sure other people that listen to the show regularly, I just want to say thanks for all you do, because I know it does take a lot of your time, and I think the effort that you put into the show is clear and evident with the production quality and the types of topics and the people you're talking to, and I just want to say thanks for all that you do, because it's been awesome.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's an honor to do it, and I truly mean that, because every time I do one of these interviews, I'm meeting someone who might become a new friend, and I'm just meeting the best people and enjoying it. And I have pages and pages of topic ideas.
Oh wow!
And I feel like I could do this ad infinitum.
Cool.
And I'm just glad that I'm able to do it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the show's future. I'm excited to, every time a new episode drops and I'm able to see what the topic is, I'm like, oh, okay. And then I have to figure out when I'm going to listen to it,
And Joe, what's your dad's name?
Joe.
Joe? Okay.
Yeah. He's a junior. I'm a third. And my grandpa was senior. So,
well, yeah. Joe Grasela Jr., thank you for listening.
All right.
I appreciate it.
I'm sure he'll be listening to this episode. So,
So, Joe, what do you think? How did my year-end evaluations turn out? Is it okay? Did I get a passing grade?
You got a passing grade. I think you're going to do well. I'm going to mark on here that I'm going to plan on retaining you as a chaplain. And in terms of future goals, I just want you to keep doing what you're doing and keep excelling at being a chaplain and being a podcaster.
Thanks. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Joe's dad.
Yeah. Thanks, Dad. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guests and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you liked what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thanks for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city. Does that sound good with you, Chaplain Altic?
It does. It does.
I hope you're ready. We're going to be doing, I'm going to do that again. I don't want to mess it up too bad. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Joe Grasela, and I'm back. Sound okay, you think?
That sounded really good.
Okay.
Do you want to take another run at that?
I think it seemed okay. I don't think I flubbed anything.
No.
All right. Go ahead. Hey, everybody. I'm Joe Grasela, and I hope you're not tired of me because I'm back.
Very good. You feel good about that one?
I think so.
Okay.
Do you think the voice sounded okay, though?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you've got a good voice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Always just sounds really high to me. So.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah, my voice, like when I hear my voice in a recording, it sounds way high pitched. Like it's really in my own ears. When I talk, it seems normal, but when I hear it in a recording, it sounds really like high.
Oh, that's funny. Mm-hmm. That's funny. Yeah, you don't have a particularly high voice.
Okay. I've always been kind of self-conscious of it, honestly.
Yeah, you're not squeaky.
Okay.
No. Let's do another goodbye.
Okay.